Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Taking a look at tonight's slate on a pretty solid one. I mean, overall, we don't have a ton of injury news, just a couple of main guys, I guess we'll take a look at. But I'm digging this slate, especially after a week 3 game slate last night.
Yeah, after last night's slate, it's nice to have one kind of like this. And the bad part about tonight's slate is that I now have the Pitbull song "Timber" stuck in my head because I've been singing "I'm Yelling Kimba" all day long because it is Kimba Walker Day for me. But overall, a fantastic slate, and hopefully I can get that song out of my head.
That's going to be a tough one. You're going to have to really take and devote some time.
Might have to listen to some Taylor Swift or something. It's the only thing that can drown out Pitbull.
Utah, New York here first. 205 total. New York 4-point favorites. I don't have a ton of interest in this game. I know you don't either, mainly just because some of the prices are rather high on some of these guys. I still will look at Donovan Mitchell in the spot, even at a heightened price tag, just with his usage. I mean, nearly 30%. Once again, I think he's kind of paying off the price still if he can get up over 30, 35 fantasy points.
Yeah, he's a guy that I do have a little bit of interest in. Obviously, can you know exceed value even at that price tag. We saw it coming off a 45-point game against the Timberwolves. It is a pretty excellent spot. This game is probably going to go overlooked. Both these teams um, play really slow and play solid defense, which is surprising, even for the Knicks being on the slate, a team like them playing solid defense. But um, it is tough to really target anyone. I think Mitchell, as you mentioned, fine. Ingles and Hood are two pretty interesting options here. Both of them are spotting up a lot, both of them about 30% of the time this season, and the Knicks do struggle to defend spot up shooters. So you could target either one of those guys. I think Ingles is fairly cheap, and it is a decent spot for him. But other than that, no one else really that I'm considering from the Utah side of things.
No, me either. Like, I'll take a night off from like Jonas Jerebko, the Thabo Sefolosha situation. It's just there's a full slate of other options.
Yeah, and I'm not really even interested in favors, especially not at the price that you're kind of paying for him now. Um, it's the minutes went down last game. Obviously, that was coming off 36 against Brooklyn 2 nights before, so maybe they run him out a few more. But the Knicks are an excellent rebounding team. They defend the rim really well. I think this is a spot where favors kind of struggles.
Yeah, I'm with you. On the New York side, also take a look at Porzingis and GPPs tonight. Like you said, I think this game will get overlooked, so we will get a slightly lower ownership on Porzingis, and it's kind of hard to ignore. Obviously, usage rate, basically right around the top of the league with a few others.
Yeah, and I think if you're targeting this game, I think the Knicks side of things is the most interesting. The Jazz, without Gobert this season, giving up a 109.7 defensive rating. Obviously, that's just 2 games, but that's still significant to note. They really can't defend the rim very well, and they're kind of struggling to rebound. So Porzingis definitely interesting. I think Courtney Lee is the guy that I'm going to be targeting in cash games just because of his price tag. I think he can come out and put up a solid game. Here he's 4,300 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel he's still pretty cheap at 4,600. Probably about a 25, 26 point upside here, but you'll take that in cash games at that price.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't mind him. I Cantor's a guy I actually have a little bit of interest in this spot. Um, usage rate right around 22%. He's rebounding a ton. Um, Jazz do take a hit with Gobert off the floor. Like, I think he should be able to get inside the paint and kind of go to town. And we look at favors, he doesn't really come out a ton. Jerebko steps out a little bit, but Cantor's kind of sneaky. He's just a little bit expensive.
Yeah, it's really tough to pay that price. I think if I'm gonna go that route, it would probably be on DraftKings, where obviously you get the double bonus, and he's power forward eligible. Um, it's a revenge game for him, so there is that narrative, and he's gonna get booed a lot. Well, I guess this one's in New York, so maybe he won't. Maybe some Utah fans traveled, but he might get up for this. We know Cantor loves the narrative games. He went off on LeBron after LeBron talked crap on him. So I don't hate it. I think, like I said, DraftKings probably a little bit better play there.
Yeah, with the load of center options tonight, like it's hard to rate Cantor within your top 5 or 7. But yeah, I think DK is a better play. Anyone else on the Knicks side?
Not really, no.
Washington, Miami, 210 total here. I don't have a lot of interest in this game, but I think it can go overlooked in tournaments. I kind of do like Wall a little bit as a pivot off of what's probably going to be a popular Westbrook tonight. He's a little bit cheaper. We haven't seen like a ton of huge upside games. There was a couple there, a week or two ago, but still a high usage. He played pretty well against Miami last year. I just think in terms of ownership, he could be a decent pivot.
Yeah, he really is. He is a solid GPP pivot off of some of the other guys. You'll see like Damian Lillard and Ben Simmons and Westbrook carry a lot of ownership. He'd be really the only guy that I'm even interested in from the Washington side of this game. Have a little more interest in a couple guys from Miami, but I don't. This is going to be another game where I think the Miami defense kind of steps up and drags the pace down. And with so many other really good games to target, it's tough for me to really get a lot of exposure to Washington here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like Bradley Beal, I prefer DeRozan over him in that price tier, just kind of dropping down. No real interest in guys like Porter, Oubre, or Morris on this slate.
Morris would be the only guy where you could maybe make a case for, but again, I mean, they said they were going to increase his minutes, and he only played 20 against the Kings. Granted, that ended up being like an 18-point blowout, but that game was close for a decent portion of that game, and he still only played 20 minutes. Um, he might be a guy worth taking a shot on, but it's still there's really not a whole lot of intrigue here.
On the Miami side, any interest in the backcourt at all?
I kind of like Waiters a little bit, and I it hurts
Oh,
it hurts so much for me to say that I kind of like Waiters, but it is a decent spot for him coming off a solid game against Detroit. Um, he would be pretty much the only guy that I'm considering. Maybe Tyler Johnson for a little bit cheaper.
yeah, I don't have a lot of interest in the Miami side. Um, Josh Richardson on FanDuel for cheap, I can consider, just given the fact that I do like to target small forwards against Washington. He's a complete boomer bust guy, so he can be a lineup killer, so he's definitely tournament only. But, he definitely has 30 plus fantasy point upside. We've seen it a couple times this season.
Yeah, yeah, I don't mind that.
So, moving on here, take a look at Sacramento, Atlanta. It's not pretty as far as the teams go, but there's actually kind of a lot of value in this game.
I think this might end up being a pretty popular game as far as getting exposure to, like, if people are going to try to get Westbrook and a couple of these higher end players in the lineup tonight. I think people are going to target several players from this matchup. Both sides of this game have some very intriguing value options.
Yeah, yeah. On the Kings side, I mean, I have a lot of interest in Zach Randolph. He's not playing a ton of minutes, but averaging about 24 per game, usage rate right around 28%. This is a guy who can go out and get you, a fairly cheap double-double, and against a Atlanta front court that I know you and I both like to target. So Randolph, I mean, reasonably priced. I kind of like better values.
Yeah, the minutes you mentioned, that's going to be an issue for every single one of these players. Like I don't think anyone on this team is averaging like more than 24 minutes per game. Maybe De'Aaron Fox might be the only one, or 27 minutes, but um, he is very interesting. We know the Hawks struggle to defend in the paint. They really can't rebound very well. It is a great matchup for Zebo. It's a great matchup for Willie Cauley-Stein too, and I think if you want to target one of the cheap bigs, he's a little bit cheaper than Zach Randolph, and it's a spot where he could actually put up a solid performance.
Yeah, and you mentioned Fox, Buddy Hield, both kind of the two backcourt guys that we can look at. Both right around the usage rate around 25%. Hield's been shooting really well this season. I have no problem going back to the well with Hield.
Yeah, he's one of my top options as far as getting exposure to a value play. We talked about it last time out, where he's just looked really, really good coming off the bench. This season, 24.9 minutes per game, 14.7 points, and shooting like 51% from the field. And the rebounds are up too. So excellent spot for him. I like targeting the Hawks with shooting guards, especially guys that like to spot up because of the kind of the weaknesses in Atlanta's defense. George Hill is a guy I think you can go back to. We saw him break out against Washington, had a decent game, going up against Dennis Schroeder, who is one of the worst point guard defenders in the NBA. He's 3,900 on DraftKings. He's shooting guard eligible there. I almost wrote him up in my GPP article because he could literally come out and put up like 11 points, but he could also put up close to 30. I don't mind going back. I don't mind going to the George Hill train and kind of hopping on before it gets a little crowded.
And if you're like stacking up big plays and big names, like he's a guy that you can consider for basically a punt who, we just saw that type of upside from.
Yeah, another guy I didn't mention, but Costa Kufa is playing about 20 minutes per game. Again, in a matchup where the Hawks are giving up a lot of points in the paint and giving up a lot of rebounds and can't really defend the rim. It's a game where Kufas could actually come out and put up a solid number. I mean, we've seen it from him, a couple 20+ point games. He's 3,300 on DraftKings. Center is chock full of a lot of great options, but I mean, Kufas is a guy you could consider.
Yeah. On the Atlanta side, I'll definitely look at the backcourt guys. Like I don't mind Schroeder tonight. Once again, I mean usage 30%. He's assisting on 35% of the Hawks points, and then just kind of look at him and go, he's probably still too cheap, like for his type of role and upside. And it's kind of a middle of the road matchup. I mean, Kings are playing a little bit slower pace. Like they haven't, really given up a ton of fantasy points this year, but Schroeder's minutes and usage, I think you can consider him.
Yeah, and he's coming off a couple really bad games so this is a spot where people could just kind of overlook him because he's coming off those two bad games. But we talked about it against whenever he played the Pelicans. You want Schroeder in games where he's going against teams that can't defend the rim because he loves to drive and he loves to attack the rim. Sacramento allowing opponents to shoot 61% at the rim, 48% in the paint. That's the highest percentage in the league. With a lot of really high-end point guard options tonight that are in great spots and a couple cheaper options and some other games, he's going to go overlooked. People are going to point to George Hill being an excellent defender. People think De'Aaron Fox is an excellent defender. While I agree that they're both good defenders, they're not great this season. I think Schroeder probably goes overlooked, and he could be like Dennis Smith last night and be one of the top GPP options at point guard.
Yeah, and 6,800 on DK for that type of potential on 7K on FanDuel, like that's a pretty good bargain to take a shot on.
Yeah, it really is.
So as far as other guys go, like I don't mind Ken Bazemore or Taurean Prince. Both are kind of in that mid range where if you need them and it kind of fits your lineup, like I have no issue going that route against the Kings.
I like both options tonight. I'm probably gonna flip a coin to pick between the two because it's literally if Bazemore goes off, then Prince is probably gonna suck, and if Prince goes off, then Bazemore is probably gonna suck. I mean, these players are pretty much at this point right now, pretty much like identical. They're interchangeable. So I think if you're looking on like FanDuel because they're different positions, I think you can target either one. I'm probably going Bazemore here, but you can make a case for Prince as well.
Yeah. Dwayne Dedmon's an interesting, value. Probably obviously more of a DK guy because I just can't see myself spending down at center on FanDuel. So I think at any time that we're talking cheap centers, it's probably going to be a DK thing. We look at Sacramento. They've really struggled against centers this year. That's the area where I do like to target them the most. Dedmon's a guy, fairly risky. Minutes aren't great, but I mean, once again, minutes aren't great for kind of a lot of these guys in this game.
Yeah, they really aren't. And people might point to the minutes thing with Dedmon and use that as a reason to fade him. But I mean, against New Orleans, he was in foul trouble pretty much the entire game. Played 13 minutes, still put up 20 fantasy points. So that's excellent point per minute production. If you're able to get 20 minutes out of him against a Sacramento team that's giving up the most fantasy points per game to opposing centers, it's a spot where he could really pay off at that price.
Yep. And then obviously with Ilyasova back, it kind of creates a little bit of a front court issue with like John Collins, all of those names.
I don't mind taking a shot on Collins.
I mean, good spot for Collins. Just once again, I mean, it is a risky play.
Yeah, obviously with foul trouble and minutes could go down with Ilyasova being back. We'll have to wait and see how many minutes he's going to play, but it could just be a situation where Collins just comes in and relieves Dedmon and doesn't have to battle with Ilyasova that much for minutes. So matchups there for him. 4,800 on DraftKings at power forward is where I would play him. He's definitely worth a GPP flyer.
Yep, certainly. Detroit, Milwaukee next year, 208 total. On the Detroit side, I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Drummond in the spot. I think both of him and Embiid are kind of the pay up options for probably a lot of people. Embiid's probably going to draw obviously the higher ownership. So I think Drummond kind of makes a little bit of a pivot here where against a Milwaukee team that he's, owned once already this year.
Yeah, it's an excellent spot for Drummond. I really hate that DraftKings jacked his price up to 9K. I don't know what he is on FanDuel. I think he's actually he's a little bit he's 9,400 on FanDuel. So everyone jacked his price up tonight, but it is a great spot. He's probably my top if you just look at it. I really do like Embiid, but I think Drummond is probably my top like true center play on tonight's slate. We've seen him match up. We've seen him in this matchup put up 50 fantasy points in only 27 minutes. He's pretty much guaranteed a double double at this point. And it's just a matter of if the points are there for him. Against Milwaukee, he shot 16 free throw attempt. He had 16 free throw attempts, shot 87% from the line. It's Andre Drummond, so that probably isn't going to happen again. So I wouldn't expect a 50 fantasy point outing, but this is still just an excellent spot for him.
Yeah, I mean, Milwaukee struggles on the boards. Drummond just rebounding at an outstanding rate. It's kind of hard to get away from him on this slate. As far as the other guys go, I mean, like I don't mind Tobias Harris. You know, he's been playing well. A little bit expensive, but I don't mind him. Reggie Jackson still in that mid range. Like you can kind of still look at these guys against the Bucks, even though it probably doesn't jump off as far as like a matchup thing goes.
Yeah, I think Avery Bradley's probably my favorite guy if I'm targeting anyone else from here. The Bucks really struggle to defend in transition, and Bradley is a guy that likes to get out and run in transition. He can obviously notch a few steals and some other defensive stats. I think he's probably my favorite option as far as anyone else from this Detroit side of things. And y'all know I'm not a huge Avery Bradley fan, so for me to say that it must be an excellent spot for him.
Tell me what shooting guards you do like.
I do like a lot of shooting guards. I just don't like. There's a few that I'm just like I like Avery Bradley as a player. I don't like him as a fantasy option on most nights, but um, it's a good night for him.
Yeah. On the Detroit side, or sorry, on the Milwaukee side of things, I don't have a ton of interest really in any of these guys. I just think overall they're a little bit too expensive. Um, and on a full slate, I just can't see myself going here.
Giannis and Bledsoe and GPPs. That's that's pretty much it. I think Bledsoe, obviously, as the minutes hopefully will start to trend upwards a little bit. He's producing pretty well for this team. I do kind of like him a little bit in GPPs, but it's as pretty much it is with the Milwaukee Bucks every single night. It's Giannis, and the rest of the guys just aren't really intriguing unless it's a better matchup.
Yeah, like I can't really get excited about Middleton. I can't get excited about Henson, who are kind of the other guys that we sometimes consider.
Yeah, not tonight.
So, moving on. You got Toronto and New Orleans rematch from a few nights ago, 217 total. Obviously, Toronto on the back-to-back. I don't have a lot of interest in this game outside of really DeRozan, who's in a great spot once again. Pelicans, shooting guards against Pelicans is something I'll just continue to target, especially a guy like DeRozan with that usage rate.
Yeah, I'll make this game pretty simple. DeRozan, almost 40% usage rate without Norman Powell on the floor. Powell's doubtful for this game, probably won't play. Just a massive, massive ceiling for him. We saw him put up a huge game here. Price is down to 7,600 on DraftKings. I do like him a lot, especially considering you can play him at small forward. CJ Miles, excellent option. OG Anunoby, great point per dollar option. I don't mind either. I don't mind any of those three guys, and you could actually probably just plug all three in your lineup and be okay with it. Not on Lowry tonight, coming off a decent game. Ownership might flock that way. Not really going there again tonight. And on the Pelican side, it's 80 and Boogie. Like I don't. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to say don't play those guys. Like, they're probably not going to be a core for me. I'll have some exposure just because of their potential upside. But on this slate, like, I don't see myself paying up for them all that much.
No. Oh, and I forgot Valanciunas. Valanciunas should see a decent amount of minutes. He played 27 the last time these teams met. They need his size to defend against AD and Boogie, so I don't mind him at all. And this is a matchup where he's produced pretty well in.
Yep. Chicago OKC. This one obviously interesting. We're kind of expecting Melo to sit here. Chicago, as a team, one's not very good. But on that side, I mean, there's probably one or two options we can look at.
Yeah, Chris Dunn is going to be in the starting lineup because Justin Holiday is out, and I actually wrote him up in the GPP article. FanDuel, it's a little tough to get him because they really priced him up. I think he's like 6,100 over there. He's a lot cheaper on DraftKings. He's at 4,900. It's an excellent spot for him. I mean, he's actually looked pretty good since coming back from, or since the start of the season when he was out for an injury. I think he has 7 games so far this season. He's averaging basically like a fantasy point per minute. Usage rate is pretty high with when he's on the floor. He's got a 30% usage rate without Holiday. Really tough matchup, but it's going to be. I think at 4,900 on DraftKings, it's kind of tough to fade him.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of site dependent. As for Bobby Portis as well, where he's 6K on DraftKings, where FanDuel is 5,300. I think you can look at him there. Those are kind of the only two that I'd really look at. Marketing should be back tonight, but with Portis there, I'm not really interested in marketing because the upside really wasn't there when he was off the floor anyway.
Yeah, I think Portis is definitely interesting. There's going to be some extra rebounds to go around with Steven Adams out on the Oklahoma City side of things. Lopez minutes probably will come down again in this matchup just because OKC is going to play small, so you'll probably see Portis or Felicio play a little bit at the 5. I think Portis is definitely interesting on FanDuel.
Yep. And obviously, when we go over to the Thunder side, no Steven Adams, as you mentioned, likely no Melo. That, basically puts Westbrook into a phenomenal high usage back to work, basically what he was last year.
Yeah, the only concern I have with Westbrook is he's going to piss off Bobby Portis and get punched in the face and have to be rushed to the hospital. But it's gonna be another masked Westbrook situation after a couple of seasons ago when he had the dent in the side of his head. But assuming he doesn't get knocked out by Bobby Portis tonight, he's a great option. This is gonna be the first time where I actually considered just locking in Westbrook and moving on at 10-8 on DraftKings and 10-3 on FanDuel. It's really tough to fade a guy with a 44% usage rate without Melo on the floor. So obviously, we need to keep an eye on that news with Carmelo, but they recalled Terrence Ferguson from the G League. Leads me to believe that Melo's going to sit. So, love Westbrook. I do really like Paul George as well. We saw him have a huge game without Carmelo last time out. Those are the top 2 options from the Oklahoma City side for me.
Yeah. I think Westbrook, really at his decreased price in consideration to Westbrook standards, he's a guy I'm just going to be basically plugging in. You do have me a little worried with the Portis incident that could happen, but I'll take my chances.
I mean, you could always just hope he puts up 50 fantasy points before getting knocked out by Bobby Portis.
And I think FanDuel actually does have a punch in the face bonus now. I think it's worth 5 points.
They probably did add it, but I don't trust FanDuel to actually honor it, since they can't do much of anything properly this season.
Before we start ripping into sites, anyone else you're looking at here? We saw Jeremy Grant come in and play some bigger minutes, obviously with the injuries in the front court. Had a decent game.
Yeah, he's fine. It's still really cheap. It's a decent matchup for him, so I really don't mind him. Dakari Johnson probably gets the start for OKC. Just going to be a foul machine and probably not going to play a ton of minutes, so I'm not really going there.
Yep, with the Spurs Timberwolves next year, 209 total. Minnesota 5-point favorites. You and I were kind of talking back to back here for the Spurs. Do we see some typical pop antics and get that news at 6:00 and then we're all screwed?
It's probably going to happen because it's pop, but it's a great matchup for the Spurs. So I'm hoping we get that news fairly early on and we can adjust.
Yeah, I am too. But if things go according to plan, LaMarcus Aldridge obviously in a tremendous spot. Definitely like taking power forwards against Minnesota. Aldridge is a tough guy to kind of fade tonight, but I kind of just want to jam him in.
I do too, and it's getting increasingly tough with some of the other plays that are opening up. But we know the usage is going to be there for Aldridge without Kawhi there and without Tony Parker. The offense just kind of starts and ends with him. It's an excellent spot. His price is a little elevated. but like I don't know how you fade him, especially in cash games. Like he's just so incredibly safe in this matchup, and it should be a close game. We saw him play 38 minutes against the Timberwolves last time out, put up 48 fantasy points. I'll take that, especially in cash games at his price.
Yeah, I will too. Patty Mills, I'll definitely look at tonight's slate if I need to use him in some lineups. I have no issue going back to the well with him. Point guards against Minnesota has been something I really target all year long. Mills is going to probably play around 25 minutes again. Uh, he's kind of just there if you need him.
Yeah, both the point guards in decent spots here. We saw Murray actually be the one that performed better in this matchup last time out. Murray is the expensive one out of the two on DraftKings. Um, Assuming Popovich doesn't sit Patty Mills or something, I don't know why he would, but it's Popovich, so who knows? Assuming these guys play both minutes, I don't mind either one of them.
Nope. On the Minnesota side, I don't really have a lot of interest here. I'm not going to knock him in tournaments. I just feel, once again, Jimmy Butler, we've seen a couple weird high upside games out of him. You point out the free throws, just the other night, and obviously he came out and had an 8-9 assist game, last game. It was kind of just weird stuff that we don't see from Butler.
Yeah, I mean, he notched a double-double at 21 points, 10 assists, took 10 free throws. Still didn't shoot the ball a ton. He only took 12 shots, two of them from three. Um, I mean, at 6,900, he's still probably too cheap if he's going to continue to put up these games where he has just outlier numbers. But I don't hate him in GPPs. I can't do it in cash. Like I can't trust Jimmy Butler in cash games.
No, I can't either. And I don't really like, I'll take a look at Jeff Teague tournaments. It's not a bad spot against the Spurs. We just saw, obviously, Dennis Smith, perform pretty well last night. Outside that, though, I just like far more center options than Towns.
Yeah, I don't see myself going to Towns. He's probably a better cash game play because he has just a pretty safe floor. He just hasn't really flashed a ton of upside this season. If 4G Jang sits out, you could go back to the well of Taj Gibson. His price didn't go up too much on DraftKings. He's 4,900, and on FanDuel he's 4,800. So we've seen a couple great games out of him the last two because he's playing a bunch of minutes. So minutes equals money pretty much in daily fantasy. So I definitely don't mind going there.
No, I don't either. He's still cheap. He's below 5K on both sides. We've seen him perform well in some tough matchups before. I don't worry about him.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning as well.
So, Indiana, Memphis, 209 here. We'll start with the Indiana side because it's pretty simple.
I don't really have any interest in anyone from the Indiana side of things. You take a flyer on Collison or Oladipo, but there's so many better spots here. I don't really want to attack this Memphis game. It's going to be a slower paced game. Yeah, I just don't want to go there.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think Oladipo is really the only guy that I'd consider just as more of a multiple lineup type guy. If I'm pivoting off of DeRozan in that top spot, just because his usage rate's so high. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Memphis is more intriguing.
Yeah, they really are.
So on the Memphis side, though, obviously if Conley sits tonight, Mario Chalmers is going to open up. Tyreek Evans has continued to just play really well. Even at his price tags, I'm still just going to be kind of riding this Tyreek Evans train.
Yeah, I still do have a little bit of concern as far as the minutes go with him. Obviously, with some of these guys returning and starting to play a few extra minutes, it is kind of tough to continue to lock him in. But I mean, we saw him play 33 against Milwaukee. Memphis is scheduled to get JaMychal Green back, which does add another body to the rotation. So that could clog things up a little bit more. But it is really tough to deny the fact that he's playing really well. The usage is there for him. And if Conley sits, they're going to need another offensive weapon. So that really makes him a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, with Conley off the floor, we've seen Tyreek Evans, new 30% usage, which, it was already high enough. Gasol's another one who would see a bump without Conley. I like Gasol either way if Conley plays or not.
Yeah, if it doesn't really matter for me the status of Conley, I think Gasol is an excellent GPP option. I wrote him up today. This is a fantastic spot for him. The Pacers terrible at defending opposing bigs. They're giving up a decent amount of rebounds, and they really struggle to defend the rim. They're allowing opponents to shoot 65% at the rim, 41% in the paint, 40% on mid-range and tips, and that's kind of where Gasol does the most of his damage. So excellent spot for him, and I can guarantee you're going to get him at low ownership tonight.
Yep, definitely. And we said if Conley sits, Chalmers is obviously one of the better values.
Yeah, if Conley sits, you just plug in Mario Chalmers and just just move along. He's kind of interesting, even if Conley plays. I mean, we saw him play 25 minutes against Milwaukee and put up a decent game. There's a pretty secure, probably 20-point floor out of him. So 3,800. If you need someone that you can, get a pretty safe floor out of, I think you can look at him, even if Conley plays.
Yep, definitely. Any interest in anyone else?
Not really, no.
Cleveland, Charlotte, 219. We talked about Kemba and your Pitbull song before the pod or the coming in, but this is a game where there's just a lot of kind of clear cut plays.
Yeah, and Mike Conley did not participate in shoot around, so that makes things a little more clear. It's still a game time decision, but um, back to Cleveland, Charlotte. Kimba's a lock for me. Like he's a lock and load. I don't care what the ownership's going to be, cash games, GPPs. I don't care about the site. It doesn't matter. I'm plugging in Kimba. I want to stack the hell out of Charlotte tonight. Cleveland is terrible on defense. I don't know how you fade Kimba Walker in the spot. And even if this was a road game where Kimba has those home road splits or whatever people want to call it, I would still be using him. It's just an absolute amazing spot for him, and there's no way he doesn't pay off his salary tonight. There's just no way.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Cleveland, obviously awful on defense. They've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to point guards. Then you get to Kemba, obviously at home, check. Now take down the Cavs. I mean, it's just kind of like, why aren't we using him at this price? Like, it kind of doesn't make sense to me. Like, there'll be a few lineups where I don't have him in, and those are probably going to be the lineups I don't cash.
Probably like there's zero reason to fade him. Even in GPPs, you and I talked about it before one of the pods last time out about how like just because we're playing in GPPs doesn't mean we have to find players that don't have ownership. Like you can have chalk players in GPPs and still be successful. I don't care if he's 100% owned. Like just plug him in and move on.
Yeah, I mean the price is too cheap. 78 on FanDuel, 74 on DK. I'm on board. As far as any other Charlotte guys go, like Dwight Howard, I have a little bit of interest in. It's kind of more of a tournament guy. Probably actually not even a bad cash game guy either.
I like him in all formats. It's going to be really tough to get him in because I really like Gasol and I really like Joel Embiid and I really like 900 other centers on tonight's slate. I think if you're playing on fantasy draft, it's easy because you can just build like 5 centers into your lineup. But he's an excellent spot. Big men like him have just dominated against Cleveland so far this season. We saw Cousins put up 70 fantasy points. We saw Vucevic put up 48. We saw Cantor put up, massive games. We've seen Capella put up a massive game against Cleveland. It's a great spot for Howard. He's going to pay off his salary pretty easily. As far as anyone else, it's really tough because they're adding Nick Batum to the rotation, and that just kind of takes away minutes. None of these guys are playing heavy minutes as it is. I want to see if Batum's going to be on a minutes limit. If they come out and say that like he's a full go or he's going to play like 25, maybe 30 minutes, I think you can lock him in at his price because he's really, really, really cheap across the industry.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. On the Cleveland side of things, obviously Braun comes in as always the top option on the Cavs side. Like I don't mind kind of getting LeBron and Kemba in some lineups together and going with that correlated route. And as far as like other Cavs guys, like I don't have a ton of interest in like Kevin Love tonight. Not a great spot going up against Howard. Um, as far as like the secondary guys like Dwayne Wade, Kyle Korver, these types of plays, J.R. Smith's probably my favorite just because the minutes have been there and he's still super cheap. Like you can probably bank on him to probably get you like 20, 25 fantasy points, which is fine.
Yeah, he'd be the only other guy outside of LeBron that I have a lot of interest in. Just as you mentioned, the minutes are there. He's heating up. He only shot 37% from the floor last game, but um, when the shot's falling for him, he keeps on shooting, and I wouldn't say no to him. It's a good matchup. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, Batum will help out defensively, obviously, when he's on the floor. But overall, Charlotte hasn't been good against shooting guards.
Yeah, and I don't know that Batum would be on him too much anyways, because MKG and Batum are probably going to split the duties trying to guard LeBron.
Trying, keyword trying.
Yeah.
Orlando, Portland, 210 here. A lot of big names, a lot of big fancy names that are kind of not on my radar tonight.
Yeah, I kind of glossed over this game for the most part. There's a couple guys that I do think you can target on the Portland side of things, but I don't have any interest in anyone from Orlando. Like, there's just no one that really stands out as an excellent play here.
No, I think we can jump to Portland. I don't mind Lillard and GPPs. You and I were looking at Yusuf Nurkic, who obviously a guy you can only take in GPPs right now, but a really good spot against a bad rebounding Orlando team. They've been, getting eaten alive by centers. Like this could be a Nurkic night at pretty low ownership.
Yeah, it really could. And, we were talking before we started recording, like Nurkic's issue this season has been efficiency. Like he's taking like a massive amount of his shots at the rim or in the restricted area, and he's just not making any of them. He's ranks in like the ninth percentile in effective field goal percentage among big men this season. Orlando struggles to defend in the restricted area. They're allowing 65% at the rim, almost 40% in the paint. Like if there was ever a spot for Nurkic to actually break out and have a solid game, it would be against the Orlando Magic. It's a great spot for him. So I would definitely look at him, and I would consider Caleb Swan again, where he's cheap in the starting lineup for Portland, and we saw him play a decent amount of minutes despite being in foul trouble the majority of last game.
And that Nurkic DK price, 6,700. Like it's super enticing where you can roster two centers. Like you can play Embiid and Nurkic, you can play Gasol Nurkic. Where FanDuel, I mean, he's like a true GPP play where you're pivoting off of all of those names.
Yeah, it's tough because there are a lot of great center options on DraftKings, even if you're going the two center route. But I definitely don't mind them in GPPs.
Nope. And then we get to the last game of the night, 76ers Lakers, 219 total here. Philly side, I mean, obviously a lot of interesting plays who have been playing really well. Like it's just kind of a matter of basically to me, it's pick your poison. Like I don't have any issue with basically the entire starting five. Redick is probably the only one I'm not too intrigued with.
There is a decent chance that I'm going to have 3 Sixers and like 2 Charlotte Hornets in my lineup tonight and just go that route. Everybody from this game is in play. Like there's you could make a case, even Redick, even though it's going to be a tough matchup because he's probably going to draw a KCP defense. You could look there. I think it's interesting to note, and I've seen this talked about a couple times on Twitter already today, and I don't know how the industry is going to go about discussing this issue, but if you look at it, like the Lakers' defense has actually been pretty good this season. They have a pretty high defensive rating. They're only allowing like 106 points per game. One of the biggest factors in that is opponents are only shooting like 31% from three against them. When you get a team that's going to come in and can shoot from downtown, those numbers are going to go up, and that defense is going to start to look a little bit worse. So if people are going to be fading some of the Philly side because of the Lakers defense, I think I want to be overweight on the field.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like it kind of starts, with Joel Embiid. This is a guy who, when games have been close this year, we've seen him pick up the minutes, like in play into the 30s. And I think this game does stay close. The usage rate, I mean, over 30%. He's one of my top center options on the board. Like you said, it's kind of close with him and Drummond and Gasol, but Embiid's a guy I want a lot of exposure to, and the same goes with guys like Ben Simmons and Robert Covington. Once again, I feel Covington's still too cheap for his production this year. A good spot for him against the Lakers. He's a guy who does have those peripheral stat games where he can rack up a couple of steals, which is really great for FanDuel. And obviously with the 3-point bonus over on DK, he's great there. So, I mean, really Covington, Simmons, Embiid, Redick. I don't even mind McConnell, even though he's kind of had some down games.
Yeah, I guess the first thing to note, did you see how many minutes Embiid played last game?
It was like 34.
Played 36 minutes.
Yeah.
If you're telling me that I'm going to get if they continue like if he's going to play 34 35, 36 minutes against the Lakers, and he's 8,600 on DraftKings, and he's expensive on FanDuel, obviously, but um, he's 9,700 there. If I'm gonna get like 34, 35 minutes of Embiid in this matchup, he's like, I can't fade him. Like, there's just so much upside here. You mentioned Simmons, obviously a great spot for him. He's an excellent pivot because if people are getting Embiid, then they're probably not going to play Simmons because it's kind of tough to build a lineup with those two. Um, Covington, we have the contract narrative. He is eligible as of today to sign a new a renegotiation and extension on his current contract. So if that isn't signed before the start of this game, you know Covington's going to come out and he's going to be like trying to prove that he deserves like a ton of money. So we saw him we saw him just uh, light the nets on fire last game. It's a great spot for him. You mentioned Covington coming or McConnell after a couple down games, and I wrote about this in my GPP article today. If you look at the games where McConnell was actually able to be successful, they were a little bit faster paced contests, and he was shooting the ball a decent amount of times. He averaged like 8.5 field goal attempts in those few games. He's down to like 5.5 over his last three, except for Golden State, which was again a fast paced game. With this game being played fast, he's going to be back up to 8, 9, 10 shot attempts. The Lakers are allowing opponents to shoot really well from the field. They're turning the ball over a lot, so that really helps his floor and his upside. He's 4,500. Like I think he's has a ton of upside in this matchup tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the pace of this game. Projected pace around 110, basically eight. Higher than the next one, which would be New Orleans and Toronto. Like this is going to be a game that you kind of hammer at the end of the night. And if you don't, you could be looking at that little bar kind of going back down as like this Lakers Sixers game just moves on. Like you want exposure to this one. There's basically everything that you could possibly look at. You have value, you have top end options, you have the upside, you have safe floors. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the only other name that we can possibly talk about is Saric. I mean, what would you do with him?
You could look at him as well. I mean, he's 4,600 on DraftKings, and he's like 45 on FanDuel. Like that's still too cheap for the upside that he has. Like I know he's coming off a rough game, but he had 3 solid games before that, 4 solid games before that. So in that starting lineup, I like him. I like him a lot.
And on the Lakers side, we'll start with this backcourt. I kind of like Lonzo Ball in GPPs. Like he's not going to be played as much as people like will look at him tonight. And I just kind of think he's that perfect one if you're making a lot of lineups to kind of get a correlation with this game and have him pick things up. Because I think if Ball struggles, Lakers might struggle a little bit, especially if like Clarkson and KCP don't pick things up.
Yeah, if you look on FanDuel and you're doing and where you have to play 2 point guards, I think a decent GPP like starting point would be Lonzo Ball and Kemba Walker, or Lonzo Ball and Russell Westbrook, because he's gonna go overlooked because there's just a ton of options, and people probably got burned by him against Phoenix. He sat the entire fourth quarter and only played 28 minutes. Of course, it's Lonzo, so he didn't shoot very well. The assist numbers weren't really there, and he turned the ball over a decent amount of times. So people probably not going to go back to the well there. It's a decent spot for him. I know the Sixers defense not very good this season. I like him. I think Kentavious Caldwell Pope, who is someone that I'm extremely interested in tonight, comes out and has a good game, and we know Clarkson is going to come in the game, play 24, 25 minutes, and probably take like 18 shots in that period of time. So again, he's a guy that I think you can target as well. And on DraftKings, where he's eligible in 2 different positions, that opens things up a lot.
Yeah, Clarkson's super cheap. KCP super cheap. KCP is getting huge minutes. He's going to be basically a staple for me, especially on FanDuel rostering 2 shooting guards. Moving into the front court, like I kind of like Julius Randle tonight once again at a cheaper price. The minutes kind of still are fluctuating, but obviously a great fantasy points per minute player. I have a lot of interest in him and Brook Lopez. I think Lopez is interesting in this spot. I feel he's been struggling against centers this year, as they kind of always have been. They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game, and Lopez is still cheap.
Yeah, I think starting with Lopez, obviously the minutes have been there for him the past few games. The production's been really solid. They're going to need him to guard like they're going to need his size to guard Embiid. I wouldn't say they need him. They just need his size to do it because he's not a very good defender. But which actually is part of the reason why I'm down on Randall in this matchup. Like if you take Brook Lopez off the floor, Randall's their backup center this season. Like he's playing 87% of his minutes at center. Like Randall doesn't really have the size to defend Joel Embiid. So I think this might be a time where we see Randall play a few less minutes. You could take a flyer on him in GPPs. That's fine. But I think this could be a situation where we only see him play 17, 18 minutes tonight.
I mean, obviously Kyle Kuzma's been the guy who soaks up those power forward minutes. I mean, he's basically playing 35 plus minutes a game. Do you have any interest in him tonight?
Yeah, I always like me some Kuzma and even Brandon Ingram. Both these guys just playing so many minutes. It's really tough to consider fading either one in this matchup.
Yep. So outside of that, I mean, we're not playing Luol Deng. We're not playing Vander Blue. So that's about it.
You know what I find funny is last time out against Phoenix, I was like, I'm interested in everyone from the Lakers side of this game except for like Corey Brewer and a couple of these other guys.
And they played the fourth.
And Corey Brewer comes out, plays 18 minutes, puts up 16 fantasy points. Yeah, I think Luke Walton just did that to spite me, but not going that route again. It's the starters pretty much, and Randall and Clarkson. Clarkson in cash I think is fine. Of course, I mentioned Randall and GPPs, but don't play any of these peripheral guys, the Brewers, the Luol Dengs, the Josh Harts and Vander Blues and all those guys.
Yeah. Outside of that, that's it. Finally got through it. That was a long one. What do you want to do? You want to do points per best points per player? You want to go top guy tonight?
Let's do points per dollar. I'll let you start.
Yeah, I'm gonna take KCP in that game. He's still cheap enough for me to consider. I could go Behrman somewhere else, but I think either Clarkson or KCP are probably the best points per dollar guys.
I am going to that game as well, and I am going to say Brook Lopez.
Oh, I like that. I was gonna say McConnell could be another one too.
I almost went there, but I'm gonna go with Lopez.
So if you haven't gotten the hint, play that game because we spent 15 minutes on it.
if let's just put it this way: if you're cashing before that game starts and you don't have any exposure to that game, you're not cashing tonight.
No, you're dropping down quite a bit. So
yeah,
that's it for us. You can check out DailyFantasyCafe.com for our great tools and content. You can also check out Brent's GPP article, which will be posted here very shortly within the next 5 minutes. So that's it for us, and good luck tonight.
Good luck.